Now, during this period of 4 or 5 years, I kept on painting, and since I lived villages, I did thematic subjects of husking, winnowing, and threshing of corn and interior of village life. And I painted village life and people, and even till today, I am painting the life of the people and the country that I. So during this period of the from 47 to 52, I kept always painting landscapes, figure compositions, and my art was life oriented as my high school, primary school teacher made me respect life and consider the human surrounding as of paramount importance, and that brought me into Marxist movement. But when I resigned, I was as if I had resigned from life. I told the party that I can't work under you and under such disciplines. I must be a free bird, and I must have my thought processes and all that. And I continued to paint, and this process started way back in 41 when I joined Nagpur School of Art in the evening classes, and then from 44 to 46 in JJ School of Art, I was painting all through in my spare time. And while I was in Garden College and while I was working in the Communist Party, painting process never stopped. Only the percentage of time that was given was only 1/10 of my working life, but I continued to paint. This getting out of the Marxist Party was very painful. All my friends were Marxist, and just leaving them was like betraying them. And I was so depressed for 1 year that I didn't know that where I belonged to. And you build a number of friends over a period of years, and whom you disown. That was the most difficult human and psychological process that I passed through. But eventually the new process starts, you build new friends, and in Lahore, where I wanted to settle, we created a group called the Lahore Art Circle. Salim Shahid of Radio Pakistan was a secretary, Shamza, myself, Mariam Habib, Muin Najmi, Ahmed Pervez, and Safdar. They were part of this group, and we held exhibition in Lahore, in Murree, and in Karachi under the auspices of this Lahore Art Circle. In the meantime, Professor Shakir Ali had come to Lahore in 1953, and he was a very experienced teacher. He had 5 years in Slade schools, 1 year in this, 5 years in JJ School of Art, 1 year doing mural painting in JJ School of Art. Then he went to Slade. There he did 4 years diploma from Slade, one of the finest art schools in the world. After that, we went to Czechoslovakia. There he did 2 years design course. So that made it 11 years. And then he went to Paris, where he worked with André Loth in his studio for 6 months. Now, with this experience, Shakir Ali returns with a foreign wife, settles in Karachi, and a salary of probably 200 or 250 rupees in Mama Parsi school. And his wife got so fed up and tired that she left him in desperation. So he left Lahore, Karachi, and came to Lahore and was there. And now, since he had the latest avant-garde information about art, myself, Ahmed Pervez, Shamza, Muin Najmi, the whole movement revolved around him. And in a sense, though he was not our teacher, he gave a very spiritual and intellectual guide in the painting, and a transformation came in our work. I used to go and do landscapes in Lahore, all the street scenes of different interior of city of Lahore, of various part of Lahore were painted by me. I painted Pindi, I painted Murree, all the street scenes and different things. I did the same at Bahawalpur and Multan, painting their old houses and derelict places. And my work began to get. One day Shakir Ali got very angry with me. He said, "What is this bloody romantic flirtation with watercolor and painting the obvious? Why don't you study Cezanne?" I had studied Cezanne, but Cezanne didn't do much to me. It was Gauguin and Van Gogh which were very much near and dear to me, and they were communicated and talked to me. But Cezanne left me cold, and I stopped painting, and I took out books from the British Council Library and wanted to see, and it didn't move me. I got so frustrated that I didn't paint for nearly 6 months. Eventually, it was the Multan and Bahawalpur houses that brought me into some sort of modern wavelength where the nature of things itself was modern. You copy them and they become the cubist houses and modern paintings. Not that I understood cubism, and by that time I decided that I better leave Pakistan and go abroad. Again, it was my own saving and all that. I went to London, and it took me another year before I understood the significance of form. And I was very keen student of history of art before I left, and after I went there, I became even more so. And I kept on joining one library after another to get books immediately because all libraries didn't have the books. Eventually, I had to join the British Museum Library where all books were available, and with the help of one of the professors in Slade, I got a certificate that I was doing research on textile of the subcontinent as well as Iran and Egypt, and with that pretext I became its member. Now life was very tough. You had to work 9 to 5 with the London government in their advertising department, which was very time consuming and very tiring, and then come and paint in the evening and also get books and read them. So it was just 4 or 5 hours of sleep that I was getting, and I was most of the time studying. The world was at my feet. The Paris was next door, Rome and Amsterdam, and everything was there. And my work was growing, and it was growing. But uh, there was never satisfaction. It was always a sort of fight for a higher value in life, for a higher value in feeding information, in giving myself those thought processes which were lacking. I got interested in Western music, and I got interested in ballet, I got interested in opera, but it's a great uphill task to be able even to touch these disciplines of life like a tangent touches a circle, because it needs a lifelong devotion to understand Western classical music, ballet and opera, and also understand the subtleties of creativity in the process of painting. So I bought music of Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, and I kept listening to it, and it was very time consuming because one record was of 30 minutes duration, and you had to listen one record every day, and life is short and time is less, and it was such a difficult job. But gradually I began to get into wavelength, and I had a girlfriend who was a ballerina from Norway. She introduced me ballet, and in that I studied Nutcracker Suite, Swan Lake, Giselle, Dying Swan, and number of other ballets performed by the British, by the French, by the Russian ballets, and the different choreographers and the different meanings. The same thing with another friend of mine, Miss Domini, that I learned about Mozart and Bach and Beethoven, and then I went to concert halls, Royal Festival Hall and Albert Hall, and heard Toscanini, Sir Malcolm Sargent, Sir John Barbaroli perform the Fifth Symphony. I listened to them performed by different conductors, and Miss Aker and Miss Domini helped me to get to the subtleties of knowing the difference in the improvisation and presentation by these great masters. But again, I will say that it was very superfluous because I could not read music, and I only understood it by the dint of listening it repeatedly and learning the music by heart rather than going into the spirit of it. But I made an attempt. It was an abortive attempt, both in case of ballet, opera and music, because most opera is in Italian. I only enjoy Maria Callas and other great singers in the broader sense of the context, not in the true sense. But an effort was made, and whatever I could take became to a certain extent a part of my life and part of my partial pleasure that I could get out of it. But the real friends were my books. The books were my never failing friends, which offered the lifelong experience of a person in a discipline, in a form which saved my time and gave me the information which took them a lifetime to produce those books, particularly on art. And from art, I wandered off to literature. From literature, I learned most, because I think the most profound thought of human race are the product right from Plato and to the present day writers. They are not just literature, but they are philosophies of different periods and different time. So meandering through that also was a very tough job to select and to choose, and without any guidance in any person. But I made my little effort and it was useful. From there I got interested in archaeology, and then I passed quite a bit of my time, free time, going through museums, going through sites, in all the museums in Paris, Amsterdam, Rome, Venice, and other places in Europe, and getting a first-hand information, particularly from the Louvre and Vatican and the British Museum and the National Gallery in London, and museums in Hague and in Amsterdam and Brussels, which enriched my visual experience and also made me involved in anthropology. I read Margaret Reed and other social scientists who were working in different ethnic groups, right from the caveman's painting, how the caveman thought, how he behaved, why he painted in a cave while he had no language, he had nothing to rely on, why he painted, and what were the social and other factors that made him paint and think and do things, and what was the inspiring factor, what were the factors that made them live, made them express themselves. So all these factors through the earliest paintings of Altimora, Lacave and Rhodesia and Algeria, I felt that I was one with them, I danced with them, I hunted with them, and I probably had the same disadvantage of language, but probably they had a great advantage that they were creating language, they were naming things, they were devolving ways of living, of dancing, of singing, of love making, of painting on the walls. So we call them primitive, but they are, to me, they were more advanced, more intense, more powerful than even Picasso, because it was intuitive expression. It was free from inhibitions and complexes of which we are victim today. And they were the real painter. And even today, the aborigines of Australia, the African wood carvers and bronze carvers in Africa, the Eskimos of the poles, and the pre-Columbian primitives, whom we call were very butcher and brutal and uncivilized, were the most powerful sculptors, painters and visionaries that human race has ever. The more primitive the man, the more intense is their expression, and it is far superior to the most sophisticated and refined man of today. So I feel that I am one with nature, I am one with the history of man and history of human thought, history of music, history of dance and history of architecture and history of sculpture, which is has been the prime concern of man. The artist, the musician, the dancer have been the recorder of history, have been the greatest creative visionaries that at all ages have created. And I am lucky that I am a painter, and lucky that I am interested in history of thought and art and archaeology and ecology of man and its growth and its antecedents and its presence. And in this predicament, I started collecting objects from the different parts of the world of different periods. So in my very humble collection, I have got things which go back to half a million year old, and most of it is at least 100 years old and about that. I have got things from Rome, from Greece, from Egypt, from Syria, from Persia, from Tibet, from Nepal, from Indonesia, from China, from India, from different Muslim countries and different periods, from America, from pre-Columbian civilization, and from even Eskimos, carvings in bones, and things from Gandhara, from Mohenjo-daro, and from so many periods that in my little studio I've got them all stored in a disorderly manner. I call it orderly disorderly manner, but my friends consider that they are disorderly place, and they breathe around me, I breathe around them, and I feel as if I'm living through ages. And that is one pleasure in this receding age and last part of my life that I have when I'm locked up in my studio with my old things. I feel that I am the man of this world. I have lived through ages, and I breathe and live in a climate of work where all those are not my people of the past, but they are my contemporaries also. This is, in a sense, the intake that I have taken in terms of music, literature, history, philosophy, archaeology in my inner growth. But now I come to two things, that myself as a painter and my predicament. As a matter of fact, this whole thing should have been on my predicament as a painter, but I thought it is necessary to describe this phenomena which brings me to this stage and this discipline of talking, about which I involve all the five senses of man into his growth, into the growth of society, into the growth of a civilization or culture, as we call it, which manifests and which is the beauty of life of different periods of human race, and which enriches. This is the garden of thought, of form, of movement, of sound, of human emotions, of philosophy, of poetry, of prose, which enriches, enhances, and as a matter of fact immortalizes the human race's achievement. Now, with Paris and London and libraries and books and archaeology and history at my feet, what happened to me? Why did not I grow? Did I grow? And if I think I didn't grow, why I didn't grow? Every friend of mine who meets me, talks to me, thinks that I am a very knowledgeable person and I should be creating works of art of a higher discipline. But somehow or other, the muses of creativity never touched me. Somehow or other, I got lost in the muses of creativity of others, and in the process of collecting other people's knowledge, I got so overawed and influenced by them that my own process of creativity did not or could not flower in the manner in which I could. When I went to London, there were about 90,000 painters. I contacted Mr. Eric Newton, who was one of the most important art critics in relation to art, like Herbert Reed and Professor Gombrich and all that. And I was lucky. He met me and he saw my work and he seemed to like my work. And even he wrote a few things which he allowed me to be used in inviting press. My first exhibition after 1.5 years of my stay in London was very successful. It was talked about. I sold a lot of paintings, so much so that I could live a whole-time painter without having to work. But then my work didn't grow with the speed with which it should grow. I had seen the thought process of those great creative painters like Picasso, Braque, Matisse, Salvador Dali, Kandinsky, and Matisse, and so many others, that I wanted to get to that level of expression where you create a school of thinking, where you are not just one of the fellow travelers belonging to a school of thinking. And that thing was not coming. My work was progressing. In the first stage, my work was bought by ordinary people who wanted a good Eastern Latin painting in their drawing rooms. But the second stage, I was not selling, work was improving, but I was not taking that creative flight, which is the essence of creativity. And I was wondering that better buyers, better friends, Eric Newton, Herbert Reed, Stephen Bone, Sir Coldstream, Professor Townsend, Ruskin Spears, and all those were my friends. I was moving in the best of company. I was in the best of atmosphere. I was getting the thing that I was seeking, but not achieving the things in my process of creativity. So from 56 to 65, it was a period of intense involvement, intense urge to work, to seek, to find, to experiment. But then my own limitation, the intuitive quality of expression, the nerve sensitivity in the application of pigment, the nerve sensitivity in the lines that I created, the forms I created, was absolutely of a pedestrian level. Since I was an intense person, since I had a personality that I could get galleries, I could make friends with others, that really didn't help me to be a painter. And you are not talented for 9 years. You can be talented for few years. I was 34 and I was still in the doldrums of creativity, and those sort of conceptual, perceptual thinking was not coming my way. So I decided that if I continue to stay, I'll be important, I'll sell, I'll have name, my works will go. But creating not a school of thinking, but creating a very personal, individual vision was even beyond me, which was the first step in the process of creativity. And this thing disappointed me so much that for 1 year I didn't paint, and I said, look, there's no point in staying here and persisting. Persistence is very important in any process of creativity, but from 41 to 64, it is a 23 years period. And I analyzed that probably I'm not the one who was bestowed with those quality of nature and quality of creativity, so it is useless to persist here. So I decided to come back to my country and be here useful in a different manner. Now this is not self-pity, this is not fighting shy to fight, but this is a self-critical analysis of one's inability to be able to that level of creativity where higher values in aesthetics are added not in terms of a school of thinking, but in terms of a intense personal vision, which is a small contribution, but even that was not happening. Now I would be daft if I were to persist or continue, so I decided to come back to Pakistan and be helpful to those who are more gifted and more talented than me, and create a climate of work where I could be a sort of guidance and help, because nobody helps anybody to be a poet or a singer. Picasso's son didn't become a painter, and Einstein's son didn't become an scientist, and Faiz Ahmed's Faiz's daughter or children couldn't become poets. So it is not the teacher or the school or the climate of work that creates a painter. It is those inner gifts of intuitive expression that makes a visionary, a thinker. And even in the worst condition, you become a Rabindranath Tagore or you become an Amrita Shergill. Gauguin left Paris to Tahiti Island to become a painter, whereas Cezanne and everybody came to Paris to become a painter. So it's not necessary just the climate of work. What is important is that inner gift. And unless that inner gift is cultivated and one is inspired and fired to express, the thing becomes work of expression, work of art, work of significance. Otherwise, uh, there are 3,000 graduates qualified each year in the various schools in Britain, and in my uh, 11 years or 12 years stay, 60,000 artists were created, but only 6 or 7 of them became painters of national significance. They didn't become painter of international. Only 1 or 2 of them are now in the international field. So the question now arises, as far as creativity is concerned, is the climate of work and intake important? Is the population of 10 crores of people, how many geniuses there should be in Pakistan? In literature, in music, in painting, in any other thing. Is a crore of people not enough to produce one great singer? Is 10 crore of people not good enough to create one cerebral painter who can add new aesthetics to painting? Can't they create a couple of fairs? Or they can't. Why is it that in certain periods of history there was an impetus and there were a number of thinkers and philosophers and painters, and why is it that in the same area in certain 100 years hardly anything is created? For instance, in our early 20s and 30s and 40s, there was Rabindranath Tagore, there was Amrita Shergill, there was Iqbal, there was Faiz, there was Kishan Chandra, there were so many luminaries producing work of a very high intensity in that period. Why in that period? Why not now? Is society not capable of producing? And if it is, why are they are being produced in the West? The scientists are doing colossal, gigantic achievements in science. Writers are doing some of them very nicely in writing, and painters have created nearly 35 schools of painting in the last 80 years. Why is it is happening certain place? Why is it not happening? If the primitive can do great work, why can't we in primitive society do work of profound quality? Right, Rabindranath Tagore or certain singers sang in the finest way, and certain poets wrote some of the finest thing, and the writers did the finest thing. This is a question of creativity and environment and situations in which process of creativity should find an outlet and impetus in that. But somehow other it is not taking place. Coming back to my own, I'm not parading my a sort of synthetic explanation of my incapabilities, but I am talking in the broader sense, and it involves most others working in the subcontinent, that somehow there we are in an ego ride. And ego ride is a process where one is under the delusion that he is great. A poet and writer, he publishes his book and he presents it with prefaces by people better than him, and those people who are better than him, somehow they're out of politeness or out of what, they write very utilizing prefaces or forewords for their book, and they come out, they hold meetings, and they get press to write about them. So is the case in painting. We are having exhibitions and catalogs are written, and press is motivated to write goody things about them, and they begin to believe in these wrong evaluations of themselves. Why don't they have critical mind of their own to evaluate and reject their writing and reject their painting? But the process is going on, and the rat race is so profound and so well organized that with the help of radio and television and press, the mediocre are raised to the stature of national level, and they begin to believe in it, and they, before they begin to arrive, they achieve their death of in ignorance, in that self-conceit, in that ego right. From my point of view, the graph of our intellectuals in the various disciplines of expression, that they show tremendous promise from the age of 20 to 25 or 27, and then they reach a climax and they reach a height where it becomes a plateau. Then that plateau remains the same from the age of 30 to 50 or 60. It goes up a little, and if anything, instead of going up, it begins to go down, and the climax is the death of a very promising intellectual, for the simple reason either he doesn't have those qualities, or that he becomes complacent and does not give that manure and intake which enriches his power of perception and power of creativity to become a better thinker in his chosen vocation of life. This is the tragedy of the third world, and I feel that certain discussions, certain seminars on this subject should take place, where the identity, the process of creativity, the process of perception, the process of intake, the process of involvement, the process of growth of certain disciplines should be discussed and analyzed without it has to be ruthless. It has to be very critical, and people should be told, you are mediocres, you are good for nothing, all this importance that you are getting is of no use. This is publicity oriented, money oriented journalism, of commercialism in art, literature, in poetry, in music, where higher values are thrown to dogs and unimportant people become the national figures in politics, art, literature, music, architecture, and even in drama, even in radio and television. In anything we do, it is the mediocrity that is ruling supreme, and the more mediocre the person is, the most vociferous he is about himself, about his projection, and he is annoyed if any criticism is made of him or her about the mediocrity of their concept.